Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give another minute or two for other folks who are, just gearing up their laptops and joining. So. All right, we are going to kick this off. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Scaling from 1 to 2. We are so thrilled to have David Hopkins, president of the 15 Group here today. If nobody has had the chance to meet David, David has over 30 years of experience in the restaurant industry. He began his career in restaurant management in the 1990s and held very senior management positions within some of Toronto's top restaurant groups. He joined Surcorp and reconstructed their financial and accounting department to then bring major growth success, which then inspired him to form the 15 Group, which is a leading hospitality consultancy. So today, David will be assessing why some franchise restaurants fail and what you need to know to ensure your business is thriving and is a profitable operation. So please, throughout the webinar, we encourage active participation. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them during the Q&A, or we, of course, will also follow up after the fact as well to answer your questions. And of course, in food service, stuff often pops up while you're working. Should you need to hop off, no fret. A recording of the session will also be sent to you afterwards as well. So without further ado, let's get started with scaling from 1 to 2 with the 15 Group. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you. Excited to be back at it in 2024 with a webinar. We haven't done one with Restaurants Canada since I think the RC show, which is coming up in April, and we'll be at that again. So excited to be doing webinars again. I love this part of the job. I love being able to communicate stuff of our learnings over the years and stuff that we get heavily involved in. So scaling from 1 to 2, great topic, something that we get heavily involved in. In fact, it's a large part of where I started the 15 Group. I'm going to just, I'm not going to talk about myself much because I don't want to, but, I did do business school back in the 80s. My gray hair shows it now. As was mentioned, I managed a number of restaurants throughout the 90s. I was a controller and financial analyst at Surcorp, which, as was mentioned, I reconstructed the way they did information processing for financial reporting. And started the 15 Group in 2001. And a lot of our work was kind of surrounded what we're going to talk about a bit today. The 15 Group I started in 2001. Since 2001, we've worked with over 1,000 food and beverage operations. We work Canada-wide and actually internationally now. We're doing a fair bit of work in the US and beyond. But we have offices in Toronto and Vancouver, and we have a team of 35 thereabouts. It seems to change now that we're back into growth mode, so it could be more than that. But we do two main things at the 15 Group. We make existing restaurant operations more profitable, and we develop a lot of new and exciting concepts for whoever needs a new concept. Could be hotels, could be golf courses, wineries, or individuals. A lot of individuals we've worked with to create new concepts that then grow and multiply and grow from 1 to 2 or more. And it's interesting, whenever we develop a concept for individuals, 90% of the time, the end goal is probably not to have just one restaurant or one quick serve operation. Usually the goal is to either franchise, grow organically, corporately. So we're constantly creating concepts that will have that ability to grow. We definitely are experts in the space. I just flashed up a few companies that we've worked with over the years. You know, Fat Bastard Burrito, or Fat Burrito now. We worked with them when they were one location, looking to begin franchising, and worked with them on how they could go about that and grow. And they've had a great successful run. Impact Kitchen, a concept in Toronto, for those of you in Toronto, a concept we helped create and launch for our client that now have multiplied into at least 4, it could be 6. I think they're in Miami now as well. Smokes Poutineery, probably the best known quick serve concept that we created. So when we created that concept, we did all the brand work, the development, built out the franchise model, the operations model. And obviously Smokes has been hugely successful. Casada, another burrito concept that we worked with when they were 2 locations, I believe, and got them franchise ready for their growth. Meat and Bread, a concept we created out in Vancouver that for, again, with our clients, for our clients. And then Mercado, a Toronto-based company that that we started with Jack and Don, the 2 owner brothers, when they were 2 locations, and they've now grown into one of the premier, I would say, restaurant groups in Toronto. Anyway, those are just a few examples, but we do have a ton of experience in this space. So how do you scale from 1 to 2 and then to even more? Because that's usually the end goal. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 key considerations. First thing we're going to talk about is proper planning. And this is something that's often overlooked, and I'll get into why, but something that's often overlooked when a restaurant is looking at growing, or a food and beverage operation is looking at growing, is how to go about that, the proper planning, the proper profitability model, and the proper way to do it. The second thing we're going to look at is systems and procedures. Anyone who's been in any of my webinars before, I talk a lot about systems and procedures. They're important for an independent restaurant, but they're massively important for anyone who's looking at growing. And we'll get into a bit about why. And then the last point is franchisee selection and franchisee maintenance, which is a kind of the third part. You know, proper planning is before you do the growth. Systems and procedures is how you embrace the growth, and then franchisee selection and maintenance is how you then follow up and ensure that you're growing effectively. So let's start with proper planning. I always use, if you've been to any of my webinars, I use some concepts to try and illustrate what I'm talking about. So today we're going to use David's Dogs. It's my quick serve franchise concept. It's Fake Franks. Thank you to the 15 group brand development team for putting together that. Maybe we'll launch it one day, who knows? But so David's Dogs is a quick serve concept. We're looking at doing multi-unit growth. We've got one operation, and we can look at 2 things when we're planning. We can either look at corporate growth or franchise growth. So corporate growth is where we open all the restaurants, we own them, we build them out. There are entities, and we have full ownership of them. Franchise growth is where we allow other people to use the David's Dogs name, to use our manuals, our processes, our procedures, our brand, and they go and build them and pay us a franchise fee or royalty. 2 different ways you can grow. You know, and just for those of you who aren't familiar, a operation like Casada or like Fat Burrito, they are examples of franchise growth, whereas a company like Starbucks grew through corporate growth. And Starbucks is doing some other stuff now, but largely it was through corporate growth. And when you're planning around that, the advantages of corporate growth is that you have complete control over your brand, over your growth, over your concept, over the execution. And you're maximizing the profitability of it because you actually own the businesses you're opening. So it's definitely an option. The downside to corporate growth is that you need a lot of money to keep opening these opportunities. You need a lot of money, you need a lot of bank financing, and growth can be slower when you go that model. Franchise growth, the biggest advantage of franchise growth is it's an accelerated model. because people are opening your concepts, your brands with their money. So there's not a lot of financing available. All your individual franchisees are getting their own financing. So you have hugely accelerated growth, and you have less infrastructure. Now, you shouldn't have no infrastructure, and we'll get to that, but you definitely can have less infrastructure. But the downside is you do lose control. So, with a good franchise agreement, you can maintain control. But nonetheless, corporately, if I've got a store that's underperforming and the GM's not doing well, I can just replace them. I can put a better GM in, I can step in and I can run it. In a franchise, it's much harder to remove a franchisee if they're not performing or not doing well. So there's a discussion there and a decision around which way you want to grow, what makes sense for your growth plan. The next thing that we find is that we've got a plan around the profit model. So I'm going to assume for most of this presentation that we're going with the franchise growth model, that we want to open a lot of franchises, and that's kind of the way we're going to move forward. We really need to take a look at the profit model and make sure that it can work. And just because you have a profitable concept doesn't mean that it's franchisable. So this is a lot of the work that we've done in the past is, okay, we go into a profitable concept. Is it franchisable? And if not, how do we make it franchisable? So here you have David's Dogs. It's doing one location. It's doing $1 million a year in revenue. You can see the outline there. I'm making a profit of $65,000. I'm happy. And I say, hey, I should replicate this. So if I'm going to go into a franchise model, this $1 million business or the next one that I open, I need to then account for an ad fund, which is a typical franchise concept, having an advertising fund that franchisees pool into, and I've got to get my royalty from the franchisee. So my $1 million in revenue franchise, which I was making $65,000 in my first location, my franchisee is now barely breaking even. And where I really need to plan is, what if my franchisee in their new location doesn't do $1 million in revenue? What if they do $750,000 in revenue? Then the problem lies that now my franchisee is losing money. And I got to tell you, the most important thing in franchising is your franchisees need to be successful. Any franchise that you've seen grow and grow and grow in locations and then peter off and it doesn't exist anymore, it's usually because the franchise group was awesome at selling franchises, but that the franchisees weren't making any money, and that way they grew quickly, and then all the franchisees start falling off because they're not making money, and it implodes. So for long-term success in multi-unit growth, whether corporate or franchisee, the other locations, they have to be profitable. So this is where the planning comes in, and how do we ensure that a franchisee is going to be profitable, not only if they're making $1 million in revenue or 1.5 million, but if they're less successful and they're only doing 750 or 850 or 600,000 in revenue, and I'm talking a quick serve model obviously here, but how do they succeed as well? So in this case, if we're looking at Dave's Dogs, I don't think we're going to franchise right away because this model isn't successful. Instead, we want to look at this profit model and say, it's good, but how do we make it successful for all our franchisees? So with Dave's Dogs, we might take a look at the food cost and re-engineer the menu a bit such that we can get that food cost in around 31%, maybe even lower. I'm not sure. We definitely would want to look at the labor model and say, okay, maybe this works great for our independent single location, but how do we make the labor model work better for the franchisee? Maybe we remove some less efficient items, some dogs on the menu, tweak the production, how it gets produced, but get the labor to come in at a lower number. So now our single location could make more like 165,000 in profit. And then when we open up our other locations, even if we have a franchisee that's doing 750, they're no longer losing 40,000. They're actually still making money on the lower revenue. So proper planning is both figuring out what the right path is for your concept. And the other thing is, like, not every concept is franchisable. When we develop concepts that are going to grow, and Smokes Poutinery is a great one when we worked with Ryan back in the day on this. You know, simplicity, ease of execution, tight labor cost in a franchise model is key to success and key to making the overall model work. So certainly figuring out what the right path is for you, but then also figuring out, okay, we've got a great model, we're profitable, it makes sense, but is it franchise ready from a profitability model point of view? Because it isn't, you'll be dead in the water as soon as you get rolling. So proper planning is the first step. Second step, and thing that we work hugely on, is then systems and procedures. And like I said, if you've listened to me in any webinar, I talk a ton about systems and procedures, and it's because they're such an important part of successful restaurant operation, and not just for multi-units, for single units as well. So the first question is, why is your restaurant successful right now? You've got David's Dogs, it's doing great, it's making great money. Why is it doing well? And it's really down to two main things. One is you have solid revenue. If David's Dogs was only doing $300,000 a year in revenue, it would not be successful. So we've got a great revenue, and we've been able to control our costs, control our expenses, so that we're profitable at the end of the day. And that really lends into guest experience and the value proposition that we're delivering to guests, and fiscal responsibility around controlling our costs within the organization. And we talk a lot about these two things: guest experience, how do we drive guest experience and value proposition, and how do we control fiscal responsibility and costs within the organization. So I'm going to talk briefly, a little sidebar, about revenue. Revenue, hands down, is the single most important thing to food and beverage success. I can make any restaurant that has great revenue profitable, but I can't make a restaurant profitable if it doesn't have revenue to begin with, or if we can't create that revenue. So we always talk about revenue reigns supreme in a food and beverage operation. And that's largely around the concept of incremental revenue and what it does to your bottom line profitability. So in David's Dogs, you know, we look at the profit model, we've tweaked it, it's now a $165,000 profitable business. Jumping ahead here, $165,000 on the bottom line, and we look at that 17% bottom line profit, and we think that's solid. But incremental revenue has such a bigger impact than that 17% bottom line profit. So once you open your doors and you're operational, so David's Dogs, it's operational, we're in business, we're paying rent, we're paying insurance, we're paying utilities, we've got our general manager. When I add another $100,000 to that business, I'm actually sending about 40 to 50% of that to bottom line profit. Because when I add incremental revenue, I've only got a few costs that are associated with that. So I've got product costs, I've got labor costs, but not 30, 40% labor costs, just incremental labor costs on that lift. I'm already staffed in my kitchen, I'm just adding a little bit more revenue on top. So the incremental labor is pretty low. And then we have a bunch of other costs. So you're actually adding a ton of revenue or profit to the bottom line when you add incremental revenue. So revenue, single most important thing to food and beverage success. So we did a survey at the 15 group. We did a big consumer survey, and I'm only pulling out a little snippet here. But we asked a bunch of consumers, how would you rate your last restaurant experience? And the results you can see here, most of the people rated it a 7 or 8. Some people rated it a 9, very small amount rated it a 10. Yeah, only 8% of the respondents rated it a 10 out of 10 experience. And then we asked the consumer, do you anticipate going back to that restaurant in the next 6 months? And if they rated it a 7 or 8 out of 10, 64% said they would go back. If they rated the restaurant a 9 or 10, 93% said they'd go back. And there's a lot more info and data that we pulled out of this survey that we did. But the number one thing we pulled out is how important guest experience is to driving repeat business and word of mouth business. So for us, driving this 10 out of 10 guest experiences is so important. And a lot of our work at the 15 group is trying to get all of these people that are operating at a 5 to 9 out of 10 up to a 10 out of 10, because that's going to do so much in driving that revenue, which just adds huge amounts to your bottom line. So for David's Dogs, you know, if we have that franchisee that's at $750,000 in revenue, and they're not at a 10 out of 10 experience, and we can get them to drive at a 10 out of 10 experience, if they add that extra $100,000 of revenue, they're actually going to go from a $20,000 profit to a $72,000 profit, which is massive. They're adding the 100 grand in revenue, their product costs and labor costs. Product cost stays where it is. Labor cost, you have some incremental labor, and your profitability goes way up. So revenue is the single most important thing. Cost control, once you've got revenue, once you're driving revenue, you've got that huge guest experience, everything's great, then profitability all comes from cost control. And it's about how do we turn that revenue into bottom line profitability. And we've gone into a ton of restaurants that have phenomenal revenue, but their profitability stinks. And it's all because they don't have the proper cost control in place. Cost control in restaurants, we're largely talking about product and labor cost. Those are the two biggest variable components, and it's where most of your expenses come from. In a restaurant, roughly 70 to 80% of your expenses are product and labor cost control. And they're the ones that you can control and that can go sideways quickly, right? If, you know, my rent is fixed, if I'm paying $8,000 a month in rent, that it is what it is. It's going to be $8,000 next month and the month after, but product cost and labor cost control can go sideways very quickly. Product cost is the main one we focus on. And the reason why product costs can go sideways so quickly is because staff steal, first and foremost. And all of you out there that are saying, no, staff don't steal, my staff are great. I encourage you to chat with me or we'll talk about it more, but staff steal left, right, and center. It's so commonplace in the restaurant industry. It's unbelievable. And just to touch on that briefly, it's because staff don't see it as stealing the things that they're doing. They see it as scamming, which is very different than stealing. Scamming is okay. Stealing is what bank robbers do at banks. Staff overportion inherently. Staff always want to give more to guests, which is great in terms of value perception. But if staff are overportioning even just by 10 or 15%, the impact on bottom line profitability is massive. And staff waste product. Tons of product goes in the garbage, gets thrown out due to improper inventory control processes, rotation of product, a variety of things. But these three things are absolute killers for restaurants. Going back to the staff piece, like I said, you may think your staff aren't stealing. A study done by the US Chamber of Commerce, sorry, I don't have a Canadian-based one for you, but the US Chamber of Commerce found that 75% of employees have stolen at least one item from their employer. The National Restaurant Association in the US did a similar study and got a similar result in terms of hospitality staff and the percent that will steal if they have the opportunity. So it exists, it happens, and it's a major thing that we work with our clients at the 15 group is how to control that, how to be fiscally responsible within your organization. So fiscal responsibility is knowing where you're at financially, where you're going, and having checks and balances along the way to ensure your operation is profitable. And this is so important, again, not just for the independent, but definitely if you're doing multi-unit growth. And the reason why is because, you know, guest experience, number one important thing, fiscal responsibility, second most important thing. And when you have a single operation and you're successful, you're the one that's driving these two things. You know, we go into so many operations and they're doing fantastic, and it's because the owner, you know, if you've got one location, you're all over guest experience, you're all over delivering it. Actually, we've got one client out east, and it's incredible. You can tell that the owners are all about guest experience and delivering that. And with growth, that's getting diluted. So guest experience, you're delivering it, you're all over it, you are the owner operator. And fiscal responsibility, you're there 24/7. You receive every delivery that comes in, you're monitoring everything, you're all over the staff, what they're doing. The problem is when you go into multi-unit growth, you're no longer there. You open 2 restaurants, you open a second one, you're now 50% at each. So you're no longer all over guest experience 24/7. You're no longer monitoring every order that comes through the door, every delivery. You're no longer monitoring the staff, what they're portioning. You're no longer all over that. You open a third one, now you're diluted out even more. You open up 10 and you're barely involved in any of them. So this is where systems and procedures are so paramount, not just to that fiscal responsibility piece, but to the guest experience piece as well. So systems and procedures ensure that the guest experience functions as you intended and that fiscal responsibility is maintained. And we've gone into, I can tell you, we've gone into multi-unit groups that are well over 30, 40, 50 locations, and they're struggling and they're about to implode because they haven't embraced this and they haven't got this dialed in at all their franchisee locations or their multi-units. So on the guest experience side, just some examples of systems and procedures, right? We need the value proposition to be what we intended. We need that guest experience to be out of this world, 10 out of 10. So if I'm not going to be there every day of the week ensuring that happens, I need opening checklists to make sure everything that I would do is being done by my staff. I need closing checklists to make sure everything I would do is being done. I need line check procedures to ensure product is of the highest quality, that everything is being done the way that I would have done it if I were there. I need proper inventory rotation procedures. When I had my David's dogs, I was in the kitchen all the time. I made sure everything was fresh. I now need a process to make sure people do it the way I would do it. I need preparation procedures. I need every David's dog to be produced the way I would produce it. If I have the best hot dog concept and it is a 10 out of 10, there's only one way to do that. It's the way I do it. That is the 10 out of 10 way. So I need to make sure everyone else is doing it the exact way that I want it done. That is the 10 out of 10. You can't just wing it and make a 7 out of 10 and expect to succeed. And documented recipes. Right? Again, in conjunction with proper preparation processes, recipes that are documented so people know what they're producing. Funny story, we worked with, I always have funny stories. We worked with a group about 15 years ago, a pretty good franchise group in Ontario market. And we were working with a couple franchisees and we asked to see the recipes and the preparation procedures from the franchisor. We asked the franchisees to show us the prep procedures of the recipes, and they had none. And we were like, well, what do you mean you have none? We're like, well, the franchisor didn't give us any. And we're like, well, how are you making everything? And they were like, we're just doing it based on what we think it should be. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like the franchisor had not provided them with anything in terms of what their 10 out of 10 guest experience was supposed to look like. And needless to say, that franchise did not thrive. It did not grow. It did not succeed. It floundered. So proper staff training program. This is a process that needs to be in place. If we're going to execute at a 10 out of 10 level, how are we doing that? What's important in terms of the staff and the way they execute? So all these things, you know, they're important in my mind for any operation, because even if you think as an owner, you're there 24/7, you're not there 24/7. You take some time off, you take vacation, I hope, you do certain things. So any operation should have it, but if you're going to do multi-unit growth, hugely important. And then on the fiscal responsibility side, inventory control. hugely important. One of the biggest, beyond revenue, when it comes to cost control, managing inventory and product costs is one of the biggest reasons, or not managing it is one of the biggest reasons we see restaurant failure. Labor scheduling procedures. How do you schedule staff? What's the process to it? What tool are we using to do it? How do we monitor it on a daily basis to be successful? Daily labor check procedures, which I just touched on. Proper financial statement reporting. The whole financial statement process is hugely important to a successful F&B operation. So these are all just some examples of those processes, but there's a reason why you have systems and procedures or standard operating procedures, and it's to make sure that the restaurant executes at the guest experience that's intended, and that they're turning all that revenue into profitability in the best way possible. So people often ask me, I get asked about tech stuff all the time, and I just want to touch on that here because tech's come obviously a long way over the last 20, 30 years, so on and so forth, since I started in the industry for sure. And I think tech is massive and a massive aid for places, but it's all based on, in my mind, whether it helps you improve guest experience or maintain fiscal responsibility. So I've got some examples of companies that we like to work with. Navi, a company that we were involved in, we consulted for them. It's an inventory control solution. Silverware, a POS system that we love. Push, a labor control software that we do a lot of work with. Some other ones, Smooth Commerce, Socialware, MeasureUp. These are all examples of tech that help elevate the guest experience and help maintain fiscal responsibility. So certainly you can use tech to help you with that. And we highly recommend you do. But again, there's so much tech out there. I would really focus on two questions when you're evaluating tech. Is it helping me improve guest experience? And is it helping me maintain fiscal responsibility? And if it's doing either of those, 2 thumbs up. I'm going to just sidebar here because I could talk about systems and procedures and guest experience all day long. At the 15 Group, we released a book called The Kitchen Sink about 6 months ago. It is all about elevating guest experience and fiscal responsibility within an organization. So we have a promo code. We love working with Restaurants Canada, so we have a special 75% off promo code. I don't think I have the website up here, but if you go to the 15 Group website, you can find the Kitchen Sink page. And I believe our website is thekitchensink.com. I should know that. Anyway, we'll get it in a follow-up email that'll go out to everyone attending. But you can certainly find it from the 15 Group website, which is www.the15group.com. We have a link to the Kitchen Sink book. Use that promo code. It's 75% off, which basically is covering, I don't know, our shipping or something. I don't know. But if you want to learn more about guest experience and how to elevate it and how to effectively control costs, this is a great book. Because I could literally talk about it for an hour and a half, but we don't have time. So systems and procedures, key, proper planning, the first step. The last thing I want to talk about is franchisee selection and maintenance. So 2 things. Well, first of all, evaluate what is important for your concept in a franchisee. And it's going to be different depending on what your concept is and how you're looking at growing and what's required in your success. So for example, what I need if I'm franchising David's Dogs is probably very different than what I need if I'm franchising The Keg. 2 totally different concepts, totally different execution, totally different model. So what's important in a franchisee is different. So, you know, I would highly recommend you don't just do what a number of companies do, which is if somebody is interested in buying a franchise and they have a pulse and they have money, we'll sell them a franchise. That is generally a route for disappointment. So it's important that you evaluate what's important in your concept for your growth and your success in a franchisee and you have a process by which you go about finding those right people. So, and that's strategic, right? You've got to come up with a game plan. You've got to go about evaluating that, and you've got to go through a process. How do we assess a potential franchisee? How do we make sure they're right for us? And how do we make sure that they're going to be successful? Because if they just have a pulse and they have the money and they aren't going to succeed, that's going to be part of the implosion of your growth, right? So having that whole franchise assessment process is very important. And then beyond that, how do you evaluate franchises once they're open? How do you ensure that things are being done the way you want? So, a lot of franchises that we see grow think, okay, you know what? I'm just going to open up franchises. I don't want to go the corporate growth route. I don't want to have an internal head office infrastructure. I just want to sell franchises, and that's that. I'll open franchise here. I'll do one in Barrie. I'll do one in Ottawa, and I'll grow. I would highly emphasize you need to plan around that, and you need to have a process by which you ensure that franchisees are doing what they're supposed to uphold your concept and your brand. And so this is the simplest way is the location audit process, where you and your team, and you do need a team. If you're going to grow, maybe you don't when you're 1 or 2 locations, but if you're going to be a 30, 40, 50 franchise group, you need a team to ensure that the franchises are doing what they're supposed to be. So there's a location audit process where there are regular audits done. There's a whole scoring process. There's a process by which you're evaluating the franchisee, and there are certain penalties or ramifications or things they need to do if they don't meet a certain score. And that could be retraining, that could be, and in a worst case, it could be loss of the franchise. So having a process by which you ensure that the franchisee is adhering to what you want them to do is incredibly important. And related to that is ensuring that you have a good franchise agreement. So, the corporate growth route ensures that you're in complete control of your operation. You own the locations. You can fire the GM at a location if they're not very good. You can go take over the operation. You can do whatever. You own it. In franchises, it's not as simple as that. Like I said, removing a franchisee is not the easiest of process. But this is where you want a good franchise agreement that lays out everything that needs to be adhered to by the franchisee, everything that you're allowed to do if they are not adhering to certain standards, certain audit scores, all of those things. So when you're going this route, you need to ensure, number one thing, if you're going to open a franchise, if you're a single unit, you want to grow. Well, sorry, number one thing, I'm biased, but I would say number one thing is hire the 15 group to come in and help you do that. Number 2 thing is get a good franchise lawyer, and we've got a couple of the best in the business we can recommend, but you need a good franchise lawyer, and you need to invest the money in that to ensure that you have a franchise agreement that is going to give you as much control as possible over the franchisee and over your growth. Not as much as if you open them yourself, but pretty damn close in terms of what a good franchise agreement will let you do. So on that note, sorry, I thought I had a closing slide, but I don't. On that note, absolutely, I'm going to say, hey, if you're a single location and you want to grow and need help, call us. This is what we do. We would love to help you. But beyond that, if you're successful, you have a single location, you're successful in what you do. I'm also going to say congratulations to you, because you are one of the few. Like the restaurant business, as you've probably experienced, it's a tough business. And if you're succeeding, you're profitable, and you're looking at growing, hey, hats off. We would love to help you take it to the next step. But congratulations on your success, because it's challenging out there. Not just post-COVID, it was challenging long before COVID came around. So anyway, If you need help, definitely call us. Thank you for listening to me blab away for 40 minutes. I love doing it. Hopefully you got something out of this. And I think we have a few minutes for questions if there are any that came in.
Yeah, thank you so much, David, for all of your insights. And if you folks want to also see David speak live, he will be at the RC show, the Restaurants Canada show at the Enercare Center from April 8th to April 10th. I'll give you a little preview. One of the sessions he'll be speaking on is how to stay profitable amidst inflation, as we all know and we're dealing with it. And that will definitely be on the Monday programming. And of course, the schedule for the programming will be released soon on rcshow.com. David, we do have one question here for you. Do you recommend having a flagship store or having all locations be as similar as possible?
Oh, good question. Again, that's part of your conceptual planning. So I definitely think you should have a flagship store. Like, you need at least one corporate store. In fact, a lot of places will open 2 to 3 corporate stores. I think when we helped launch Smokes Poutineery, I think they did the first 3 as wholly owned and then franchised. You should definitely have a flagship store that is your bang on 100% great store. That's a store that you train your franchisees out of. That's a store that's the example of how perfect execution is, perfect guest experience, all your perfect processes and procedures. So you should definitely have a flagship store from that point of view. Should you have a flagship store that's different than a lot of your franchisees? You can do. We've seen some franchises grow where they have quick serve concepts and they franchise those, and they also have larger kind of fast express or larger seated concepts that are also part of the brand and part of their growth, and they even franchise those as well. And they may be different models, but again, that's all in your planning process. But definitely having a flagship that is your prime example for your franchisees and for everyone in terms of this is the perfect David's Dogs example is key for sure.
The 10 out of 10.
The 10 out of 10.
And we have one last question here as we are soon running out of time. Are target food costs and labor cost percentages the same for franchise concepts or different?
They're going to be different. In theory, the model's all the same. If at the end of the day, if you have 2 franchises and one's in Mississauga, one's in Scarborough, their product cost targets are going to be the same because they're buying the same. Generally, we see franchisees have very similar mix of sales. So the recipes are the same, the price point's the same, the costs are all the same. So product costs would be the same in that case. But we've worked with a number of franchises where they have different input costs in the prairies versus West Coast versus East Coast. We've worked with some franchises that have different pricing models in different centers. So obviously, if you have a franchisee that's open in Niagara Falls and you allow them to charge a different price point than you would in Toronto, then obviously they're going to have different product cost percentages. So it can be different. I recently did an interview for, I can't remember which outlet it was, but about how McDonald's has different price points all over the place. All their franchisees are different price points, and you could be paying completely different prices between different locations. So anyway, product costs can be different, and same with labor costs, right? Again, they should be fairly consistent in similar markets, but it depends on a number of factors. And again, minimum wage is different province to province. It's provincially mandated. So you could have a completely different labor cost in Nova Scotia than you do in Manitoba. So yeah, it depends. In theory, the model should overall be somewhat consistent and adhered to, but it can have nuances for sure in different markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So we are 1 minute away. So any other questions that we have in the chat box today, we will definitely reach out to you to answer your questions directly. And if you have any further questions about scaling your business or succeeding at your restaurant industry, please send David an email at dhopkins@the15group.com. All of this information and recording of the session will be sent afterwards, along again with the discount code for David's book, The Kitchen Sink. And again, thank you so much, David, for sharing your wealth and experience and knowledge. Thank you to everybody else here today for participating. And again, wishing you all a great Tuesday and stay warm.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.